The war room of the flagship Ascendant Throne had never been so quiet. 40 of the most powerful military leaders in the Valorian Dominion sat in their elevated seats, their compound eyes fixed on the massive holographic display at the center of the chamber. The blue light from the projection cast strange shadows across their armored exoskeletons, making them look like statues carved from dark stone. Supreme Commander Thalox stood at the head of the council table. He was old by Valorian standards, his carapace showing the pale gray marks of 800 cycles of life. His forearms were clasped behind his back in the traditional pose of authority. He had led the Dominion's military through 6 major wars and had never once tasted defeat. His name was spoken with fear across 100 star systems. But today, something was wrong. Everyone in the room could sense it. 3 years, Thalox said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made several junior officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. 3 years ago, we began our expansion into Kreth territory. Our analysts predicted total victory within 8 months. Our forces outnumbered theirs 4-1. Our technology was superior. Our soldiers were better trained. He paused and let the silence stretch. Today, I received a report from the 7th Fleet. They have abandoned the Meraxis system. All 4 colony worlds. Gone. Our forces are in full retreat across 7 star systems. 7. He turned to face the council directly. I want someone to explain to me how this happened. No one spoke. The holographic display shifted, showing a map of the war zone. Red markers indicated Valorian positions. There were far fewer of them than there should have been. Large sections of the map that had been solid red just 1 year ago were now empty or marked with the yellow of contested space. Subcommander Yirith rose from her position near the back of the chamber. She was younger than most of the officers present, her carapace still showing the deep black color of youth, but she was the head of military intelligence, and right now, everyone was looking at her for answers. Supreme Commander, she began, her voice steady despite the weight of attention upon her. The situation is complicated, then uncomplicate it, Thalox replied. Yirith moved to the central display and began pulling up files. Images appeared in the air. Battlefield reports, casualty lists, grainy footage from helmet cameras. Our initial assessments were correct. The Kreth military is not significantly more capable than we predicted. Their weapons, their tactics, their numbers, all within expected parameters. If we were fighting the Kreth alone, we would have won this war 2 years ago. Then why haven't we? Because we are not fighting the Kreth alone. Yirith pulled up a new image. It showed a creature unlike any Valorian. It stood on 2 legs, had only 2 arms, and its body was covered in some kind of flexible outer shell, in patterns of green and brown. Its face was flat and soft, with 2 small eyes set close together. It was holding a weapon and appeared to be shouting something. Humans, Yirith said. They call themselves humans. A ripple of confused clicking sounds passed through the council. Thalox raised one of his upper arms for silence. I know of humans, he said slowly. A young species. They achieved faster than light travel only 40 of their years ago. Their homeworld is a small, rocky planet in an unremarkable system. They have no significant military presence beyond their own territory. He made a dismissive gesture. They are not a threat. With respect, Supreme Commander, I believed the same thing 18 months ago. Yirith pulled up more files. 18 months ago, the humans signed a mutual defense treaty with the Kreth Collective. At the time, we considered it meaningless. A political gesture between 2 minor powers. And now? No. I have 3,000 battlefield reports that mention humans. I have footage from 200 separate engagements. I have testimony from survivors across every active front in this war. Yirith's voice grew quieter. Something is happening on those battlefields, Supreme Commander. Something we do not understand. She played one of the video files. The footage was shaky, captured from the helmet camera of a Valorian soldier during some kind of ground assault. The scene showed a standard urban combat environment: ruined buildings, smoke, debris. Valorian troops were advancing in formation, Their movements coordinated through their natural hive-mind connection. Then the humans appeared. There were only 6 of them, moving between the buildings with a speed that seemed impossible for creatures of their size. They did not fight like any species the Council had ever seen. They used the terrain itself as a weapon, appearing and disappearing, striking from angles that should not have been possible. The Valorian formation, 30 soldiers strong, began to fall apart in seconds. The footage ended when the camera's owner was killed. The last image was a human face, flat and alien, looking directly into the lens with an expression the Valorians could not read. "What are we looking at?" Thalox asked. His voice had changed. The dismissive tone was gone. "They call themselves Marines," Yrith said. "It is a word from their largest ocean. Apparently it refers to soldiers who fight from ships. The humans deployed approximately 800 of them across our theater of operations." 800? One of the other commanders let out a sharp, clicking laugh. "We have lost entire battalions. You are telling me 800 soft-skinned primitives are responsible? I am telling you that I do not know what is responsible," Yrith replied. "That is why I requested this meeting. I need authorization to conduct a full statistical analysis. Every battle where humans were present, every casualty report, every piece of footage we have recovered. I want to understand exactly what we are dealing with." Thalox was quiet for a long moment. He watched the frozen image of the human face on the display. Such a strange creature. So fragile-looking. 2 eyes, 2 arms, thin skin that could be cut with a blade. They needed special equipment just to breathe in many environments. They required constant temperature regulation. By every measure the Valorians used to assess a species' combat potential, humans should have been among the weakest in the galaxy. "And yet, you have your authorization," Thalox said finally. "I want a full report within 10 cycles. Find out everything about these creatures. Their biology, their history, their military doctrine. Everything." "Yes, Supreme Commander." "And Yrith?" Thalox turned his compound eyes directly toward her. "Find out why our soldiers are dying. Because something is killing them in numbers we have never seen before. And I want to know what it is before it kills any more." Yrith bowed and left the chamber. The council remained in session for another 2 hours, discussing supply lines and fleet movements, and all the ordinary business of war. But Thalox barely listened. His mind kept returning to that frozen image, that soft, alien face. 800 soldiers, in a war involving millions. It should have been nothing. It should have been meaningless. So why did he feel, for the first time in his long life, the cold touch of fear? 18 months earlier, the sky above Valdris IV burned orange with the light of falling drop pods. Sergeant Katie Morales counted them as they came down. 100, 200, 500. Too many to count. Each pod carried between 20 and 30 Valorian shock troops. The math was simple and terrible. "Sarge?" Private Danny Ortiz was crouched beside her at the observation post, his young face pale beneath the dirt and sweat. "What do we do?" Katie lowered her binoculars. Behind them, the mountain pass stretched for 3 kilometers through the jagged peaks. Beyond the pass lay the civilian settlement of New Helsinki, where 4,300 Kreeth colonists and their families were trying to evacuate. The transport ships needed 16 hours to load everyone. The Valorians would reach the pass in 2. She looked at her squad. 12 Marines. They had been sent here as military advisors, a diplomatic gesture to show Earth's support for its new Kreeth allies. They were supposed to train local militia, attend meetings, and smile for cameras. Nobody had expected actual combat. Now 14,000 enemy soldiers were falling from the sky. Katie keyed her radio. "Command, this is Sergeant Morales. Request permission to engage and delay enemy advance at grid reference 77 Alpha." The response came from Colonel Veth, the Kreeth garrison commander. His translator made his clicking language sound almost human. "Sergeant Morales, your survival probability in that scenario is less than 2%. I recommend immediate evacuation with my forces." "Understood, Colonel." Requesting permission to engage. A long pause. "Permission granted. May your ancestors welcome you with honor. Katie switched off the radio and turned to face her squad. 12 faces looked back at her. Some were scared. Some were calm. All of them were waiting. Here's the situation, she said. 14,000 hostiles incoming. Our job is to buy time for those civilians to get off-world. We hold this pass for as long as we can. She pointed to the narrow gap between two mountain peaks. That choke point is our best friend. They can only come through 20 or 30 at a time. We make them pay for every meter. Corporal Luis Reyna was already studying the terrain. We can set charges along the ridgeline. Bring down some rockfall. Slow their advance. If we position shooters on the high ground. He trailed off, his mind racing through possibilities. Do it, Katie said. Danny. I want mines along the approach. Spacing of 15 meters. Maria. Find me good sniper positions on both sides of the pass. Everyone else, start building fighting positions. We have 2 hours. They moved. There was no hesitation, no argument. These were Marines, and they had been trained for moments exactly like this. Within 30 minutes, the mountain pass had been transformed into a kill zone. Hidden explosive charges waited beneath loose rock. Mines dotted the approach like deadly flowers. Fighting positions had been carved into the stone, offering cover and clear firing lines. Katie walked the line one final time, checking each position. When she reached Private Amy Santos, the youngest member of the squad, she paused. You okay, Santos? The private looked up. She was 19 years old and had been out of boot camp for less than a year. Sarge, I joined up because I wanted to see the galaxy. Maybe meet some aliens. She managed a weak smile. I didn't think I'd be fighting this many of them on my first deployment. Katie put a hand on her shoulder. You remember your training. You trust the Marine next to you. You do your job. That's all any of us can do. She looked out at the valley below, where dust clouds marked the approaching enemy. And Santos? Those civilians down there? They're counting on us. That makes this the most important thing we'll ever do. The first Valorian scouts appeared at 1,400 hours. They moved carefully, their 4 armed bodies carrying multiple weapons as they advanced up the valley. Katie let them come. She let them enter the pass. She let them reach the first marker stone she had placed earlier. Then she pressed the detonator. The mountain itself seemed to come alive. Explosions rippled along the ridge line, sending tons of rock crashing down into the pass. The scouts disappeared beneath the avalanche. For a moment, everything was dust and thunder. Then the real attack began. The Valorians were good soldiers. Katie would give them that. They adapted quickly, sending their troops through the pass in tight formations, using their fallen as cover. But the pass was narrow, and the Marines held the high ground. Every time a Valorian formation pushed forward, they were met with precise rifle fire from positions they could not see. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky and began to set. The pass filled with bodies. But still the Valorians came. They brought up heavy weapons and began bombarding the Marine positions. Corporal Reyna took a piece of shrapnel to his leg but kept fighting. Private Santos ran out of ammunition for her rifle and switched to her sidearm. When that ran empty, she threw grenades. At hour 6, they lost their first Marine. Private Tony Ruiz took a direct hit from an energy weapon while repositioning. He died instantly. Katie didn't have time to mourn. She grabbed his ammunition and kept shooting. At hour 10, the Valorians tried a flanking maneuver, sending troops up the mountain face to attack from above. Maria spotted them through her scope and picked them off one by one as they climbed. When her rifle overheated, she borrowed Danny's and kept shooting. At hour 14, Katie took a hit to her left arm. The Valorian round punched through her armor and shattered the bone. She injected herself with a combat stimulant, wrapped the wound with one hand, and switched her rifle to her right shoulder. She didn't stop firing. The night came and went. The Marines fought in darkness, using thermal vision and the muzzle flashes of enemy weapons to find their targets. By dawn, 3 more Marines were dead. The survivors were exhausted, wounded, and running low on everything, but they were still holding. At hour 16, Katie heard a new sound. At first, she thought she was imagining it. Then it grew louder. The roar of atmospheric engines. She looked up and saw Kreeth military transports descending toward the pass, their weapons already firing on the Valorian rear positions. The relief force had arrived. When Colonel Veth found Sergeant Morales, she was still at her fighting position, her rifle aimed down at the pass. Her left arm hung useless at her side. Her face was covered in blood and dust. Around her, 4 surviving Marines were slumped against the rocks, too tired to move. Below them, the mountain pass was choked with Valorian dead. The bodies were stacked so thick in places that they formed walls. The colonel's tactical officer began counting and gave up after the first 1,000. Sergeant Morales, Veth said slowly, his translator struggling to convey his tone. How many soldiers did you have? 12, Katie replied. Her voice was hoarse from 16 hours of shouting orders. Started with 12. The colonel looked at the pass. Then he looked at the 5 exhausted humans before him. His species did not have facial expressions that humans could read, but something in his posture changed. It might have been respect. It might have been awe. It might have been fear. The civilians, Katie said. Did they make it? Every transport launched successfully. 9,400 colonists reached safety. Veth paused. Because of you. Katie finally let her rifle drop. She closed her eyes and let out a long breath. Around her, her surviving Marines did the same. They had done their job. They had held the line. Senior Analyst Corvith had not slept in 6 cycles. His office aboard the Ascendant throne was buried under data tablets and holographic displays, each one showing a different piece of the puzzle he was trying to solve. Empty nutrient containers littered the floor. The air recyclers hummed constantly, struggling to keep up with the heat from all the active equipment. He was the best data analyst in the Valorian military. His work had predicted the fall of the Morath Empire 3 years before it happened. He had identified the weakness in the Syndicate fleet that led to their surrender at Kilos Prime. When there was a pattern to find, Corvith found it. But this pattern was different. This pattern kept him awake at night. He pulled up the data from his 17th engagement analysis, the Battle of Cathara Station. It was a space installation, a refueling depot in neutral territory that both sides had been fighting over for months. The Valorians had finally mounted a boarding action, sending 2,000 troops to take the station by force. They had failed. The reports said a human lieutenant named Derek Holloway had been stationed there as part of a small advisory team. When the boarding began, he had ordered his 3 fellow Marines to help evacuate the Kreeth civilians. Then he had gone to the main reactor room alone. The reactor room was the key to the station. Whoever held it controlled the power, the life support, the artificial gravity. The Valorians knew this. They sent 200 soldiers to take it. The battle lasted 9 hours. Corvith watched the footage recovered from Valorian helmet cameras. He watched it again. And again. Each time, he noticed something new. The human never stayed in one place for more than 30 seconds. He used the reactor room's complex machinery as cover, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. He set traps using the environment-overloaded power conduits, venting steam pipes, unstable catwalks that collapsed under the weight of Valorian soldiers. At one point, his weapon ran out of ammunition. The footage showed him taking a weapon from a fallen Valorian and continuing to fight. When that weapon was destroyed, he took another. When he ran out of ranged options entirely, he fought with a blade and his bare hands. The Valorians eventually took the reactor room. It took them 9 hours and 167 soldiers. When they finally cornered Lieutenant Holloway, he was bleeding from 11 different wounds. He had a broken arm and 3 cracked ribs. He was still fighting when they killed him. The evacuation he had bought time for was successful. Every civilian escaped. Corvith made a note in his file. Single human. No support. Confirmed kills. 167. Time delayed. 9 hours. He moved to the next engagement. And the next. And the next. The pattern was always the same. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not follow predictable combat doctrines. They adapted constantly. changing their tactics based on terrain, available resources, and enemy behavior. They used weapons in ways they were never designed for. They turned everyday objects into instruments of death, and they would not stop. That was the part that disturbed Corvith the most. Other species, when wounded badly enough, would retreat or surrender. Their bodies would force them to stop fighting, but humans had something different. They could push through injuries that should have killed them. They could ignore pain that would have paralyzed a Valorian. He pulled up a medical analysis that one of his colleagues had prepared. It described something called the human adrenal response. When humans perceived danger, their bodies released a chemical cocktail that increased their strength, speed, and pain tolerance. Their heart rate increased, their senses sharpened, their fear was converted into aggression. Other species had similar responses, but nothing on this scale. The human body could sustain this state for hours, burning through its energy reserves to keep fighting long after it should have collapsed. The medical analyst had called it biological combat enhancement. The Kreeth had a different name for it. They called it the Fury. Corvith interviewed captured Kreeth soldiers who had fought alongside humans. Their accounts were remarkably consistent. When combat began, something changed in the humans. Their movements became faster. Their decision-making became sharper. They seemed to know what was going to happen before it happened. They communicate without speaking, one Kreeth prisoner told him. Hand signals, eye contact, small movements that we cannot read. It is like they share thoughts, but faster than any technology. Corvith had heard of this. Humans called it unit cohesion, or combat awareness. It came from training together for years, learning to predict each other's actions. A human fire team that had worked together long enough could function as a single organism. Each member, knowing exactly what the others would do without needing to ask. The Valorians had their hive mind connection, which allowed for instant coordination, but the human version was different. It was not telepathy. It was something deeper, a trust built through shared experience, shared hardship, shared purpose. And unlike the hive mind, it could not be jammed or disrupted by electronic warfare. Corvith spent 2 full cycles researching human history. What he found made him deeply uncomfortable. The humans had achieved faster-than-light travel only 40 years ago. Before that, they had been confined to their single planet. A small, blue world they called Earth. And what had they done on that planet for the thousands of years before they reached the stars? They had fought. They had fought constantly. Against their environment, which was more hostile than most Valorians realized, extreme temperatures, violent weather, deadly predators, and against each other, the human historical record was an endless catalog of wars. Small wars, large wars, wars that lasted generations. They had developed weapons of such destructive power that they could have destroyed their own planet several times over. And they had nearly done it, multiple times. But they had survived. They had kept fighting each other, kept improving their weapons and tactics, kept pushing the boundaries of what warfare could be. While other species were still learning to farm, humans were perfecting the art of killing each other. The galaxy had thought humans were newcomers to war. The truth was the opposite. Humans were the most experienced warriors in known space. They had been practicing for 10,000 years, and these soldiers, these Marines, were not ordinary humans. Corvith found records of their selection and training process. Only a small percentage of humans who applied were accepted. Those who made it through were subjected to physical and mental conditioning that would have killed members of most other species. They were trained in every form of combat, every type of terrain, every possible scenario. By the time a human earned the title of Marine, they were no longer an ordinary member of their species. They were something else entirely. A weapon that thought and adapted and refused to die. Corvith sat back in his chair and stared at the data on his screens. He had analyzed 17 engagements. He had reviewed thousands of hours of footage. He had interviewed dozens of witnesses and prisoners. The math was complete. He had checked it 12 times. He did not want to believe it. But the numbers did not lie. Corvith began preparing his report for the War Council. As he compiled his findings, his hands trembled slightly. In his long career, He had delivered many pieces of bad news to military commanders, but he had never delivered anything like this. He was about to tell the most powerful military force in the quadrant that they had made a terrible mistake. They had started a war with humans. And humans, it turned out, were very, very good at war. The War Council chamber fell silent as Senior Analyst Corvith took his position at the central display. He had requested this emergency session 3 cycles ago, and the request had been granted within hours. Supreme Commander Thalox himself had ordered all senior officers to attend. Whatever Corvith had found, it was important enough to interrupt the ongoing war effort. Corvith looked out at the assembled commanders. 40 pairs of compound eyes stared back at him, waiting. He had spent his entire career preparing for moments like this, delivering complex analysis to military leaders who needed to understand difficult truths. But today was different. Today, he was about to destroy everything they believed about this war. "Thank you for attending," he began. His voice was steady, but his upper hands kept clasping and unclasping behind his back. "I have completed my analysis of human combat effectiveness across all theaters of our current conflict with the Kreth Collective. Before I present my findings, I need to establish some baseline context." He activated the holographic display. A chart appeared showing comparative military statistics. Valorian soldiers are among the finest in the galaxy. Our natural exoskeleton provides armor equivalent to standard combat plating. Our forearm configuration allows us to operate multiple weapon systems simultaneously. Our hive mind-adjacent communication enables coordination that other species cannot match. The commanders clicked their mandibles in agreement. This was known. This was fact. Against most species, the average Valorian soldier achieves a kill ratio of 3.7 to 1. This means that for every Valorian who falls in combat, we eliminate an average of 3.7 enemy combatants. Corvith paused. Against the Kreth, specifically, our ratio is 4.2 to 1. This is why we expected to win this war quickly and decisively. "Get to the point, analyst," one of the older commanders said. "We know our own capabilities." "Yes, Commander." Corvith took a breath. "I analyzed 17 separate engagements, in which humans were confirmed present. These engagements involved a total of 847 human Marines deployed across all fronts over the 18 months since their alliance with the Kreth." He changed the display. A new set of numbers appeared. "I calculated the kill ratio achieved by human forces against our troops. I used conservative methodology, excluding deaths from orbital bombardment, vehicle destruction, or any engagement where Kreth forces were also present and might have contributed to casualties. Only confirmed, direct human kills were counted." The chamber was completely quiet now. Even the soft clicking of mandibles had stopped. The conservative kill ratio for human Marines against Valorian forces is 1 to 94. For a moment, no one reacted. Then, the chamber erupted. "That is impossible," shouted Commander Vethix, rising from his seat. "You have made an error in your calculations. The data must be corrupted," added another commander. "Our soldiers would never fall in such numbers to any enemy. One human cannot kill 94 Valorians. It defies all logic." Corvith waited for the noise to die down. When it did not, Supreme Commander Thalox raised one of his upper arms. The chamber fell silent immediately. "Continue," Thalox said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "I understand your disbelief," Corvith said. "I shared it. That is why I verified my calculations 12 times, using 3 different methodologies. The number holds." He pulled up a new display. In fact, in several engagements, the ratio is significantly higher. At Valdris 4, 12 human Marines held a mountain pass against continuous assault for 16 hours. 8 of them died. The Valorian casualties in that engagement exceeded 3,000. He let that sink in. 12 humans. 3,000 Valorians. A ratio of 1 to 340. The silence in the chamber was absolute. "I have brought footage," Corvith continued. He began playing the recordings he had analyzed. The commanders watched as human soldiers moved through battlefields with terrifying efficiency. They saw Lieutenant Holloway fighting alone against 200 troops. They saw Sergeant Morales rallying her wounded squad through 16 hours of continuous combat. They saw things that should have been impossible. How? Thalox asked finally. How is this possible? They are physically weaker than us. Their technology is inferior. They have no natural armor. No additional limbs. By every metric we use to assess combat potential, they should be among the weakest species we have ever faced. Corvith had prepared for this question. Supreme Commander, our metrics are flawed. We assess combat potential based on physical attributes and technology. The humans have something else, something we did not account for. He pulled up his research on human history and biology. Humans evolved on a planet they themselves describe as a death world. Their gravity is higher than galactic average. Their climate is unstable. Their wildlife includes numerous apex predators. Simply surviving on their homeworld requires a level of adaptability and resilience that most species never develop, he continued. But that is not what makes them dangerous. What makes them dangerous is that they spent 10,000 years fighting each other. While we were building our empire through conquest of weaker species, humans were locked in constant warfare against the most dangerous enemy possible, other humans. The display showed human military history, wars stretching back millennia, weapons evolving from stone to steel to nuclear fire, tactics refined through endless repetition and innovation. Every generation of humans has produced warriors, Corvith said. Every generation has faced combat. They have been perfecting the art of war since before our species achieved spaceflight. And these Marines, he highlighted the designation, are the result of that 10,000 years of refinement. They are selected from the most capable humans, then trained until they become something more than ordinary members of their species. Commander Vethik spoke again, his voice quieter now. What are you saying? That we cannot defeat them? I am saying that the mathematics of this war have changed. Corvith pulled up a projection. Earth has indicated that it will deploy additional Marine divisions if hostilities continue. Current estimates suggest they could field 2 million Marines within a standard year. He let the number hang in the air. At a kill ratio of 1 to 94, defeating 2 million human Marines would require the death of 188 million Valorian soldiers. Our entire military, across all branches and all territories, numbers approximately 200 million. He paused. We would cease to exist as a fighting force before that human army was even halfway deployed. The chamber was silent. Corvith could see the commanders processing the information, running the same calculations he had run, arriving at the same terrible conclusion. Supreme Commander Thalox rose slowly from his seat. He walked to the central display and stood there for a long moment, staring at the numbers. His posture was different than Corvith had ever seen. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. 847, Thalox said quietly. They sent 847 soldiers to fight us, and we are losing. Yes, Supreme Commander. Why so few? If they are this capable, why did they not send more? Corvith had wondered the same thing. He pulled up the final piece of intelligence he had gathered. A diplomatic communication intercepted 6 months ago. This is a transmission from an Earth official to the Kreth government. In it, the human describes the Marine deployment as, he read directly from the transcript, a small gesture of goodwill. They expressed hope that their modest contribution might help stabilize the situation. Thalox turned to look at him. Modest contribution? They do not appear to understand how effective they are, Supreme Commander. To them, 800 soldiers is a token force, a diplomatic gesture. They sent fewer than 1,000 troops to a war involving millions, and they consider it a minor commitment. The implications were clear. The humans were not even trying. They had not deployed their full strength, or anything close to it. They had sent what they considered a small advisory force, and that force was winning the war. Supreme Commander, Corvith said carefully, I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood what humans are. We thought they were a young, weak species that we could ignore. We were wrong. They are perhaps the most dangerous species this galaxy has ever produced. He deactivated his display and stood at attention. That concludes my report. Thalox remained at the center of the chamber for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something Corvith had never heard from him before. Defeat. Summon the diplomatic corps, Thalox said. We need to discuss our options. The War Council session lasted for another 6 hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The numbers did not lie. The Valorian Dominion had gone to war with humanity, and humanity had won. The debate in the War Council chamber had been going on for hours. Voices rose and fell. Arguments were made and countered, but through it all, Supreme Commander Thalox sat in silence, watching the holographic display where Corvith's numbers still glowed in the dim light. 1 to 94. The number had changed everything. We should escalate, Commander Vethix was saying. His voice was loud, aggressive, the voice of someone who had never known defeat. Deploy the reserve fleets, bring overwhelming force to bear. Yes, we will take losses, but we have the numbers. We can absorb the casualties and still achieve victory. Can we? Sub-Commander Yreth responded. She had been quiet for most of the session, but now she stepped forward. The humans have sent 800 soldiers. 800. Earth has a population of 8 billion. If even 1% of that population is capable of becoming Marines, they could field 80 million troops, at a kill ratio of 1 to 94. The kill ratio will not hold. Vethix interrupted. It cannot hold. We will adapt. We will find their weaknesses. We will develop new tactics. We have been trying to adapt for 18 months, Yreth said. The ratio has not improved. In fact, it has worsened. Our soldiers are learning to fear humans. That fear makes them less effective, not more. Another commander spoke up. What about targeted strikes? We identify their leaders, their command structure, and we eliminate them. Cut off the head, and the body dies. Corvith, who had remained in the chamber at Thalox's request, shook his head. Human military structure is specifically designed to resist decapitation strikes. They call it chain of command. If you kill a human sergeant, the corporal beneath them takes over. Kill the corporal, and a private steps up. Kill every officer, and the enlisted soldiers will organize themselves. They have a saying. Every Marine, a rifleman. It means that every single one of them is trained to fight independently if necessary. Then we target their homeworld, Vethix said. One decisive strike. Earth is protected by a defense grid that makes ours look primitive, Yreth cut in. They have been preparing to defend their planet for decades. Any attack on their homeworld would be suicide for our fleet, and it would guarantee that they deploy their full military strength against us. She paused. Right now, they are treating this as a minor border conflict. An attack on Earth would turn it into an existential war. We would not survive that war. The chamber fell quiet. Thalox could see the commanders wrestling with something they had never faced before, a problem that military force could not solve. The Valorian Dominion had built its entire civilization on the principle that strength was the answer to everything. And now they had met something stronger. There is another option, a new voice said. It was Elder Counselor Methus, the oldest member of the War Council. He had not spoken during the entire session, sitting quietly in his elevated seat, his ancient carapace scarred by centuries of service. When he spoke, everyone listened. We can seek terms, Methus said. Not surrender. The humans respect strength, and we have shown strength in this war, even if we have not won it. We can approach them as equals and negotiate a settlement. You are suggesting we admit defeat, Vethix said, his voice thick with disgust. I am suggesting we survive. Methus rose slowly from his seat, his joints clicking with age. I have lived for 1,200 cycles. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species more powerful than us disappear from the galaxy because they could not adapt to changing circumstances. He turned his compound eyes toward the younger commander. Pride is a luxury for those who can afford it. Can we afford it, Commander Vethix? Can you look at those numbers and tell me we can afford pride? Vethix did not respond. Thalox finally spoke. The Elder Counselor is correct, We will seek terms. He raised a hand to silence the objections before they could begin. This is not a debate. This is my decision. The Valorian Dominion will not destroy itself fighting an enemy it cannot defeat. He stood and walked to the central display, where the human image from the Valdris 4 footage was still frozen. That soft face, those two small eyes, so fragile, so harmless looking, and so incredibly dangerous. Corvith, Thalok said. One final question. Yes, Supreme Commander. Did the humans know? When they signed that treaty with the Kreth, when they sent their Marines to fight alongside them, did they understand what they were doing? Did they know how dangerous they are? Corvith considered the question carefully. He had thought about it himself, many times over the past few cycles. I do not believe so, Supreme Commander. Everything in their communications suggests they see themselves as ordinary. Their diplomatic messages describe the Marine deployment as a minor contribution. Their military assessments consider this a low-priority conflict. They appear genuinely unaware of how effective their soldiers are compared to other species. Thalox was quiet for a moment. So they sent 800 warriors to fight the most powerful military in the quadrant. And they thought it was a small gesture. Yes, Supreme Commander. They are winning a war against millions of our troops, and they think they are providing modest support to an ally. Yes, Supreme Commander. Thalox let out a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sigh of despair. Then they are more dangerous than we knew. Not because of what they can do, but because of what they think is normal. To them, this level of combat effectiveness is ordinary. It is baseline. It is simply what soldiers do. He turned to face the War Council one final time. We have not been fighting warriors. We have been fighting a species that has turned war itself into an art form. They have perfected it so completely that they no longer even recognize their own mastery. What we consider extraordinary, they consider routine. The chamber was silent. Send a message to the Kreth government, Thalok said. Tell them we wish to discuss terms, and send a separate message to Earth, through whatever diplomatic channels we can access. Tell them that the Valorian Dominion acknowledges their strength and wishes to establish peaceful relations. What about our territorial gains? Commander Vethix asked. His voice was subdued now, the fight gone out of him. We will negotiate. Some territory we may keep. Most, we will likely return. Thalox moved toward the chamber exit. The goal now is not victory. The goal is to end this war before the humans decide we are a real threat, and respond accordingly. He paused at the doorway and looked back at the assembled commanders. Let the record show that the Valorian Dominion learned an important lesson today. We learned that there are some species you do not fight, not because you cannot defeat them, but because the cost of trying is too high. He left the chamber. Behind him, the War Council began the grim work of planning for peace. In the days that followed, messages were sent and received. Diplomats began their careful negotiations. The guns fell silent across 7 star systems. The war was ending. Not with a final battle, but with the quiet admission that some wars should never have been started. On Earth, the news barely made the headlines. A minor conflict with an alien species called the Valorians had been resolved through diplomacy. The Marine advisors were being recalled. There would be a small ceremony, some medals, a few interviews with veterans who spoke modestly about just doing their jobs. Sergeant Katie Morales, her arm still in a regeneration cast, attended the ceremony with her surviving squad members. When a reporter asked her about the battle at Valdris IV, she shrugged. We held a position until reinforcements arrived, she said. That's what Marines do. She did not mention the 3,000 Valorians who had died trying to take that position. She did not mention the 16 hours of continuous combat, the wounds she had taken, the friends she had lost. To her, it was simply what the situation had required. Nothing special, nothing extraordinary, just another day at work. Across the galaxy, the Valorian Dominion would remember. They would tell stories about the soft-skinned creatures who had broken their military. They would teach their children about the war they had lost to fewer than 1,000 soldiers, and they would pass down one lesson, carved into the very foundation of their military doctrine. Never fight humans on the ground. Never underestimate their will. And never, ever, mistake their kindness for weakness. Because somewhere in the human genome, buried beneath their soft skin and their gentle smiles, was something ancient and terrible. Something forged in 10,000 years of blood and fire. Something that made them the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever known. And the worst part, the part that kept Thalox awake at night for the rest of his long life, was that the humans did not even know it. They thought they were ordinary. They were anything but.